I can certainly read it. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I thought I was going to do the last slide. All right. Today we are welcome everyone to the Society of Behavioral Sleep Medicine Virtual Journal Club webinar. We are very fortunate today to have a couple of people who are joining us from Korea and Assam. Where did you say? Kazakhstan?
Yes, Kazakhstan.
Yes. So they are crossing time zones so that they can be with us here today. I think the first slide just disappeared, Catherine. I know I was going to do an introduction. And as happy as I am to have Assam and Chun joining us, I don't know enough about their background to speak extemporaneously. Okay, so our presenter today, Assam Zhunis, just got her master's degree in computer science at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, and is going on to get her doctoral degree at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Her research focuses on uncovering meaningful patterns in data, understanding the propagation of socially relevant information, and solving challenging social science problems, politics, pandemics. You'll see some of this in the study that she's going to be discussing today. Recent research pursuits have encompassed human-AI interaction and the utilization of language and learning modules for emotional and mental well-being. Our discussant is Sung-Kyu Sean Park, an assistant professor at Kwangyon National University in the Department of AI Convergence, College of Information Technology in Chuncheon, South Korea. Apologies, Sean, if I have mispronounced some of the names there. I am not fluent in Korean at all, so I do apologize.
No, your pronunciation is perfect. Thank you.
That's good to hear. His research interests include health sciences, text mining, AI theories, cultural analytics targeting understanding human behaviors and psychiatric disorders in real-world context through the lens of large-scale data. So mobile sensing user logs, online social network logs, and so on. You'll again see some of this in the study presented today. Also, he is interested in predicting and interpreting the degree of disorders, utilizing these deep learning approaches, and then discovering users' unique traits, driving the disorders, and developing customized mobile intervention applications. He earned his PhD from the Graduate School of Culture Technology by defending a thesis on neural networks-based learning of sleep patterns and application-driven intervention. So sleep is clearly a research interest of his. I myself, Fiona Barwick, Director of Behavioral Sleep Medicine at Stanford Sleep Medicine University. I will be moderating the discussion. We welcome any and all questions. We'll all be looking at the chat. So please, we'll turn the platform over to Assam to present the study, and we will save questions from the audience for later. I think Assam and Sean will be engaging in a bit of discussion as the presentation goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. And thanks everyone for joining. Me and Sean are really honored to present our paper called Social Dimensions Impact Individual Sleep Quantity and Quality. And I think we can just start ahead. And anytime, if you have any questions or comments, you're more welcome to share them. So I want to first just go over the outline of the presentation. I would like to start with how we started this project, how we think it's important and different from the previous work. Then I will go on to the details of what kind of data we have, what's the nature of it, and then what kind of sleep measurements we derived from it. And then we will share results of how social and cultural dimensions affect the sleep, and also within each social context, how we as individuals can modify it. And then we will go for discussion. So I think I don't have to say this. I think you know more than any other that sleep is well studied in terms of how external factors like your health or your exposure to environment like sunlight, your age, gender, affect the quality and quantity of your sleep. But we found that there was really a gap of how the society around us, the social norms around us affect our sleep quality and quantity. Okay, so I think this is how we think that this limitation, this gap is really expectable First one is that generally the studies of the sleep are conducted in a very controlled experimental settings in the lab using some specialized equipment, which we cannot distribute across the world to easily, right? To see how it changes in different populations. And even though there were a lot of works that tried to compare sleep patterns in different countries, we found that most of them were really dependent on the surveys and self-reports of the people. And some others like studies that used commercial devices like wearables, like we did, they were more focused on specific population, for example, Chinese population by Zhang and all, or just two populations, and it was really hard to link differences to the cultural factors. So that's how our work may become handy. The advantages of this work is that we have the records of sleep patterns that are uncontrolled. So these are just real records in a wild setting and on a global scale from a very like single brand device. So it's pretty fairly distributed across the countries. And let me just go into the nature of the data right ahead. So regarding the demographics, you can see that, as I said, we were using data from Nokia Bell Labs, those who are consumer-grade wrist-worn devices of the same brand. And we had data from 30,000 users, 19 cities, and 11 countries, as presented on the map, in 3 continents. And in total, we had a record 52 million records, including not only sleep measurements like your bedtime, wake time, your sleep duration. We also had their information of their age, also self-reported BMI, and also activity records like how many steps you do daily. And we had, it wasn't just a short-term data, it spent 3 years from 2014 to 17. So we dived into it and wanted to see what kind of patterns will emerge out of it. So, but first thing we wanted to do, we wanted to see if this data is reliable. And we just looked at the general trend across the sleep duration, wake time, bed-in time, across ages and genders. And we found that it's really consistent with what was previously reported in the lab experiments or survey data. So it has very similar relationship, the sleep duration and age, for example, like a quadratic relationship. And also we found that similar to previous reports, women tend to sleep earlier than men, and also duration is a little bit longer than men. So having this, we also had data for each country, as we said. So we were really interested how wearables is different from the surveys. So we kindly emailed the authors of the works that I shared in the motivation part, and they shared their data so that we can directly compare how it differs between countries. And you can see that here, the pink one is the survey, and the blue ones are the wearable data. You can see that in all cases, consistently blue, the wearables data shows delayed bedtime than the self-reported, and the number of hours slept by user is consistently less than self-reported sleep duration. So that was one of the interesting, I think, facts about our data. And it wasn't just our data of wearables, we also included wearables data from different sources. I think that was Zhang et al. In China and Ong et al. From Oceania and East Asia as well. And also we had another data from South Korea from other experiments that Sean did. And we had similar patterns. You can also see that the countries that are on the left-hand side are more Western countries. And on the right side, these are Eastern countries. And if you see, like, if you look at it, you would definitely see that Eastern countries, they have more delayed sleep times and also shorter sleep durations. In fact, like less than 7 hours in some cases for Japan and Korea and China. So this is one of the findings I think that may be interesting regardless of other cultural factors. So having this, we went ahead and tried to see what kind of pattern will appear if we just see the very basic socioeconomic indicators effect on sleep. So we just took the GDP values for each country that we had and then calculated how much it correlates with the scheduling of the sleep. So when you go to bed, when you wake up, and the overall time duration in sleep. And we found that bedtime correlates more than wake time with GDP, which is, I think, consistent with previous reports of general contribution of bedtime to sleep duration. And then since these results were significant enough, we were confident that other socioeconomic or cultural factors would have effect on sleep. So this is how our kind of question arose: how are sleep patterns affected by other societal and cultural factors? But before doing this analysis, we had to agree on the measurements that we were going to use in our analysis. And here are the sleep measures that we gathered from the previous works. And let's just go over one by one. The first one is sleep duration. The very basic one is the time between you go to bed and you wake up. And then the next one is the sleep history. Very interesting metric. It's similar to sleep duration, but it's actually the 7-day average of it that gives higher weight, higher importance to your recent days. So it's represented in the formula, and it's kind of weighted by the exponential function here. The next metric is MSFSC, and MSF stands for midpoint of sleep on 3 days that is corrected by your sleep depth. So here, midpoint of sleep on 3 days is corrected by half of hours that you oversleep on weekends to compensate your sleep depth on weekdays. And hours overslept is calculated by this formula, where SD stands for sleep duration on 3 days and sleep duration on work days. So pretty straightforward. And then another interesting metric, which work think for me it was personally interesting, is because it's more about our perception of how much we should sleep. And we called it K-hour deviation, and it really measures how much people deviate from the recommended time of sleep. And recommended, of course, it's kind of like arguable. Some say 7, others say 9. So we used as a golden standard, like 8 hours. And we replicated the experiments with other K values like 7, 9, and results didn't change much. So we just took 8 hours for our main discussion. The last one that we took was the sleep efficiency, which represents the quality of your sleep. Is really about how much of your time in your bed you actually sleep. So we had that kind of data from the devices, like how much time it took for you to fall asleep, to wake up, and also if you had any periods in the middle of night where you woke up, then we also considered that time periods. So having these 5 metrics, we didn't really want to analyze them all at once. We wanted really to simplify the analysis. And to do that, we used the statistical method of reducing the dimensions, PCA, principal component analysis. And we wanted to find the dimensions that will represent all of 5. So we first mapped the data into the multi-dimensional space, and then by reducing the dimensions, we found that there is one dimension that can account for 60% of variation in the data, and it's more correlated with sleep duration and sleep history, and thus we called it sleep quantity. It represents how much you sleep. And the orthogonal, another dimension, was the one that accounted for 24% of variations in the data, and it was more correlated with MSFSC, 8-hour deviation, and efficiency of your sleep. So we call this dimension as sleep quality. So having these 2 dimensions would really simplify analysis of this large-scale data. Now, having these 2 dimensions, we can see how cultural dimensions can affect both of them, just 2 dimensions. So let's go on and see what kind of social dimensions we have analyzed. So we were thinking how to define social dimensions, and we just borrowed them from the Hofstede cultural dimensions. These are the rankings by Hofstede of the countries in terms of different cultural factors, like individualism, like how individualistic or collectivistic the country is. And the second one was the uncertainty avoidance, whether you're comfortable or uncomfortable with uncertainties. The third one was about your long-term versus short-term orientation in society. And the last one was the indulgence level, whether you are okay with having fun or you're more restrictive and want to follow rules and restraints, kind of. So these 4 dimensions, we chose them to analyze. And we fed these 4 into our linear regressions to explain these 2 dimensions. So let's just explain quickly this table. So as a baseline model, we wanted to compare how these 4 cultural dimensions can explain sleep quantity, sleep quality, compared to baseline of a model that has only GDP and median age. So we know that median age can affect significantly sleep timing on population level from previous work. So we included these 2, the GDP and median age as a baseline. And we can see that these 2 on their own can explain less than half of the variations in sleep quantity and sleep quality. So adding these 4 dimensions, will it help or not? In the full model, we found that it indeed increased for sleep quantity, 55%, but it didn't really increase for sleep quality. So going from this full model, we used the method called STEP AIC. It's a function in function to maximize this value, R-squared value, by trying different combinations of independent variables, meaning these cultural dimensions. So by applying this function, we found that the final model, M3, the mass model, can explain 63% of variations in sleep quantity by just adding individualism as an independent variable. And it can explain 55% of sleep quality by adding individualism and uncertainty avoidance to the model. So these were kind of, I think, the main findings that we got, very interesting. Increase in individualism can also increase quantity of your sleep, that dimension, and also increase in individualism and uncertainty avoidance can also increase the quality of your sleep, which was very interesting. But we didn't want to stop just here. We didn't want to say culture affects your sleep and that's it. You can't do anything with it. We wanted to go and see how individual factors affect this relationship. So the idea was pretty simple. Since we had the records of daily steps that users did on average every day, we tried to see how being an active person rather than not active person will affect your sleep in each country. So the idea is by using average number of daily steps as a proxy of activity, we divided users into groups, treatment group and control group. The treatment group is the one with top 30 active users, and control group is the bottom 30 active users. So the ones who do least steps per day. And we did it for each country. And then we would measure how treatment, meaning having the higher activity, will influence these two dimensions, sleep quantity and sleep quality. So the method was called propensity score matching. We first calculate the propensity score, or the propensity probability of a user, control user, to be from a treatment group by age, BMI, and frequency of using your device using logistic regression. So this, what it does, it controls for these variables, age, BMI, and frequency. Then after we have these propensity scores, we use them to match each user in control group to the each user in treatment group. So what it does, it just controls for these factors, age, BMI, and frequency of using a device. And then the only difference between these users would be their sleep quantity and sleep, like their activity, and then we can compare sleep quantity and sleep quality, represented by this equation. Yeah, if you have more questions, we can discuss it later. But anyways, we wanted to see how being more active will affect your sleep dimensions. So the results are as follows. We found that consistently, regardless of the country, increase in your daily steps will improve your sleep quality dimension, but it will also reduce your sleep quantity. And this kind of pattern will be more pronounced in countries, for example, like USA or Finland. So more increase in quality and more decrease in quantity. But for other countries like Japan, relative to other countries, yes, more steps per day will decrease the amount of sleep, and it will increase the quality of your sleep, but not to the same extent as a person from USA, for example. So that was one of the interesting things that we found. And we also have another plot showing interpreting these dimensions in terms of one of its components, like sleep duration and also k-hour deviation. We can show them at the end, the discussion part. So let's just talk a little bit about the limitation of the studies and the future work agenda. First of all, we have to admit that we don't know how accurate the measurements of these bands are, given that they were done 10 years ago. And we didn't really consider factors like sunlight, weather, like health condition of the users. We didn't have this kind of information. And we remember that some of the reviewers suggested us to include a discussion about how genetics can also affect this relationship, because I think it's still unknown whether being Asian genetically can affect your sleep rather than when you're, for example, from US. And another thing, all countries that we were studying were relatively more wealthy countries with higher GDP values. So we don't know if this kind of pattern still holds in more socioeconomically deprived countries. So that would be another thing, which would be next step to investigate. Yeah, so this is the summary of our findings. And I want to thank all of our collaborators. As we said, the data was provided kindly by researchers in Nokia Bell Labs in Cambridge, and it was moderated by our professor Myung Cha in our lab. And I think here we can stop and really discuss if you have any questions or comments, whether maybe you can interpret it differently, having more clinical background than we do. Yeah. Sean, do you have any comments?
No, yeah, it was very, concise and presentation, I think. But I can see some questions from the chat window, so maybe we can start from there.
Yes, I'm happy to moderate the questions here. Dr. Wack has the question, is there a social influence on sleep placement within the 24-hour light-dark cycle? So in other words, sleep starting before midnight or after midnight, not looking at sleep duration, just sleep timing, just sleep placement. Is there a social influence on that? I don't know if you examined that question or not.
Yeah, I think we did include sleep timing in the very beginning. Let me see. So when we were choosing the measurements of sleep here, we found that many of them correlate too much. Sleep duration correlates a lot with sleep bedtime, as we said. That's why we just removed it, I think, at some point of experiments. But I think from this plot, you can already see that definitely there is a big influence of where you live on how late you go to sleep. Yeah.
Yeah, you could see that. I think what's interesting is this idea that bedtime has a greater influence on sleep duration. You see not only in urban industrial locations like this, but you actually see that in indigenous tribes that have no electricity or devices. The rise time seems to be relatively consistent. Wake time, rise time seems to be relatively consistent across cultures. So it really is that delay in bedtime that shortens total sleep duration. So I think that is very replicable. You did measure timing of sleep with a mid-sleep point for free sleep as corrected for sleep during work days. One of the questions I had that's related to the question Dr. Wack asked is, I think it would be so interesting if some future study, or if there a way of looking at this data, in addition to sleep quantity and sleep quality, there was a way to include sleep timing. Because it's hard for me to imagine, and or sleep regularity. This is based on Daniel Beisey's conceptualization of sleep health as including 6 dimensions. So sleep duration and sleep quality, which you have, but then sleep timing and sleep regularity, along with sleep satisfaction and daytime alertness. I think with your data set, the timing and the regularity you could probably look at just because you have that midpoint of sleep. And my guess is there's got to be some influence on some sociocultural influence on this. I see it clinically all the time. So I see in the US, we're morning cultures, so night owls really suffer. Some Mediterranean cultures are more evening cultures, and so the night owls really thrive. I don't know if that's what you were getting at, Dr. Wack, but yeah, I think it's a really good question. And you have a great data set to answer it.
Yeah, I think that's really great point. And I agree that the sleep timing is really crucial factor for determining the the quality of sleep or the characteristics of sleep. And I believe for sure uh we did see the relationship between sleep timing and the social factors as a because we did rigorous like exploratory data analysis EDA. But from my um memory, we thought it might be overlapped with other like metrics, so we didn't report it. But maybe I can look at it one more time and then see what really goes on with regarding the sleep timing for maybe and that the factor I can aim for the next sleep research.
Yeah,
So
that would be great. That would be great.
and we didn't have any like uh sleep some kind of clinically sleep expert in the current study. So maybe at that point we might lose some insights from the domain expertise of what would be the really crucial factor for understanding the sleep. So maybe sleep timing is one of the crucial one that we have to look at it. So I think that might be one good point. Yeah, that we can look at it for the future study. Thank you.
Yeah. And then there's another question from Dr. Wax. Sleep quality is self-reported or Withings based? So wearable based. I'm pretty sure it was wearable based, right? The log KR deviation and log sleep efficiency.
Yes, yes. All are derived from the sleep watch. Only thing that was self-reported is their age, their gender, and BMI, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that made the study so interesting. This is all, as you said, real world data collected from people over time, over quite a significant period of time, and not relying on self-report. And I do think one of the most fascinating things about this study, among others, is this continued confirmation of the discrepancy between self-reported sleep and sleep measured by wearable data, or even by polysomnography in the sleep lab. We see this as well. I was curious what your thoughts were about that. Why this discrepancy between what we think we're sleeping or what we tell people we're sleeping, even if we don't think we're sleeping that, versus what the wearable data tells us we're actually sleeping. Any thoughts about that from anyone, actually?
Yeah, I think Sean knows more because he did actually experiments before.
Maybe I can go first and then Asim can back up. So yeah, tell me about it. This is really like interesting observation. And we do not argue that whether like survey is correct or wearable is correct. Maybe the truth is in between both data. But our one suspectation, but we do not clearly mention in the paper because we have no like good proof of what we have thought. But we think maybe people have some kind of feel guilty if they have some irregular sleep timing. Like I think for the every country they have their own sleep like notion or like social pressure that when people should go to sleep until like what time or when until what time people should wake up to go to work. So those kind of social pressure or social norm might affect people to answer with the survey. So yeah, it's I don't want to stress it, but it seems like Asian countries the discrepancy might be a little bit higher than Western countries. So my interpretation is it may be like there would be more like social pressure or like social norm in Eastern countries. So people should fit into their like sleep schedule into the social norm for the Eastern countries more than Western countries. So that might be interesting finding. But what we wanted to say in this study is that we have to be careful about using our data because we see that when we do the study or analysis based on the survey, then the sleep timing might be a little bit earlier than the real sleep. And if we just use only the data from the wearables, then the actual sleep timing might be a little bit earlier than the measurements. So maybe that might be some takeaways for the sleep researchers.
Yeah. I know nap culture is more common in Eastern than Western countries. Do you think, is that first of all true? This is just what I hear from friends of mine who live in Eastern countries. And if it's true in some Eastern countries, do you think that would affect the total sleep time, bring the total sleep time closer to what individuals in Eastern countries are reporting or Asian countries are reporting?
Interesting. I believe we didn't look at the nap in the current one. We just look at the nighttime sleep for the current analysis. So we didn't analyze about the nap. And interestingly, I thought nap is more like a Western culture, like Spain or
Oh,
Italy.
siesta. Yeah, that's true. Some Mediterranean
Yeah,
cultures, that's very true.
right.
Friends of mine from China, they always talk about nap culture.
I
In
see. I didn't
Taiwan,
know
nap
that.
culture.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think at least in like Korea or Japan,
Mhm.
or maybe Atem can tell us about the Kazakhstan. So we don't do have a like usual nap culture in here.
It
Yeah,
would be
Central Asia also doesn't have.
no nap culture. So more countries than not don't have a nap culture. Okay. The other
Hong
thing I
Kong
was
as
thinking, oh, sorry, go ahead, Hassan. What were you going to say?
I don't know, Hong Kong as well. I didn't see any nap culture here.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say about this discrepancy between self-reported sleep and wearable measured sleep is it might be caused by different factors depending on what population you're looking at. So with clinical populations, for example, insomnia, people do tend to underestimate how much sleep they get, which relates back to that notion of sleep satisfaction. They're not satisfied with their sleep. They think they're getting less sleep, so their reporting is less sleep, even though when you measure it with actigraphy or something else, they actually get more sleep than they think. Whereas people who don't have insomnia, it may be more about, as you were saying, Sean, this positive impression management. They're aware of how much sleep they should be getting, feeling guilty about sort of not getting the sleep they should be. So now they're overestimating how much sleep they get. So it might depend on um, the individual and as well as the sociocultural context. And the final thing, I do want to get to some of these other questions here. Okay, but the final thing I was going to say in relation to total sleep time, I think one of the challenges with this study is the measurement of total sleep time, which was really a measure of how long someone was in bed. And that is not going to be necessarily an accurate measure of total sleep time. And of course, I'm aware of this because we see people with insomnia all the time who spend a lot of time awake in bed and they are not resting. They are worrying about things, stressing themselves out. So they're not sleeping, they're not resting, they're not recovering. And so that's one of this is not a clinical population, so it may well be more accurate, this idea that when someone is in bed, they're sleeping. But even if when they're in bed, they're generally sleeping, it's still going to take them time to fall asleep, and waking up at night is normal, and it can take a little time to fall back asleep. So the wearable data may be even overestimating sleep even more than is actually occurring.
Right. I think we capture it in the efficiency measurement, because we also have this offsets.
Yeah, but that wasn't part of the calculation of sleep duration. That wasn't part of the calculation of sleep quantity. It was part of the calculation of sleep quality, which is a little different. Yeah. There's some other questions here. Let's see, where was it? Amplifying maybe the truth is yet somewhere in between. Such a good point and a good perspective for us to remember. Katerina, why things doesn't record naps well. You have 100 people in your study, 3+ years with the devices. Naps are not well recorded. Oh, that's interesting. So that might be a limitation with the wearable device used, that it might not have fully captured napping data.
Right.
Okay.
Rare. In that sense, and one more thing to consider is we don't know how exactly the readings or other wearable devices measure the exact timing. It's kind of black box. So as Sam mentioned, that we still have the sleep duration, like total sleep duration and the actual sleep duration, but we do not know how the device can detect or like discriminate the real sleep time and then just the time that people stay in bed. So those kind of things we need to understand first, actually. But I think that's also kind of one limitation, because that is, we just use the like commercial device, so we do not know actually how it works. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the limitation of any consumer wearable. The proprietary algorithms, we just don't know how they're measuring things. And I will say, measuring total sleep time, some of the consumer wearables are actually as accurate as what we would use in our sleep lab with actigraphy. So measuring total sleep time, they're accurate, but measuring total wake time, quiet wake, is a limitation for every wearable device. Like they will not, unless technology advances using AI or these LLM models, we're probably not going to get a better representation of sleep without that, is my guess.
Right.
Yeah, that would be the next frontier. Other questions? Anyone have other questions? I don't see any hands raised. All right, well, if not, I have a question. One of the things I was intrigued by with your paper was the notion of using some of this large-scale wearable data on sleep to perhaps inform public policy or organizational policy. And so I was hoping you might be able to speak more to your ideas on that, because I find that intriguing.
Right. Sean, you want to go?
Sure. So in the current work, maybe it says that there'll be so we are also fascinated that even though we do not consider any like individual factors like genetic factors or other health issues, we could explain more than 50% of the variance of data only by looking of the social norms related factors. So I think that triggers alarms for many countries which their like people have like poor sleep quality. So maybe in that country they can make some policies about how to set up the work time, or making some balance with like work days or free days, and how to promote the work culture. Those kind of issues that we can think of about the making the policy. So I think it can directly relate it to about the working culture and working policy. So yeah, I think that's one thing we can argue.
Yeah.
Thanks. I think especially for Eastern, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, for Eastern, we saw that individualism, for example, contributes to both quality and quantity. Higher individualism, higher the quality and quantity. But in the Eastern countries, the collectivism scores are usually low. And collectivism means putting the goals of the community maybe before your own personal, I don't know, personal goals. So maybe that kind of insight can be useful for these kind of countries. And the way managers, for example, set goals and then don't consider individuals' sleep that can directly affect the quality of work of the workers.
Yeah, I like that idea. So the hypothesis, I guess, would be that in more individualist cultures, people can choose their own sleep goals, their own sleep timing, how long they're going to sleep, and that's not going to be dictated by work or other demands, although of course it will be to a certain extent. But and in more collectivist cultures where work or social demands may be prioritized, an individual may have less control over the sleep goals they set. But if the collectivist society agrees that, okay, sleep is important, so we want to make sure that everyone sleeps according to their individual need, then that might be a way to sort of bridge that gap. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I think the tension I see is when I noted, when you were pointing out that the GDP, higher GDP is associated with shorter sleep duration. And so it's not hard to imagine that countries could prioritize GDP and not individual
Right.
sleep duration. So I could see policy being affected either positively or negatively.
Right. And what we used here is not GDP per capita. It's like GDP, total GDP of one country. So I think it may more mean that it reflects how the one country or one people in that country focus about the wealth or like economic power or economic conditions compared to their sleep conditions. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So there's a certain tension there. And I think the explanation offered, so for regions with higher GDP, as you say, people might be prioritizing work-related factors, so getting less total sleep so they can devote more time to work. They might also, I think as the papers, your study suggested, have more access to technology, which keeps them up later. There may also, in certain countries, be social obligations that are work-related that happen outside of work. That shorten people's total sleep duration. So it's probably a complicated mix of things. But the idea that the information could be used to inform public policy, I think, is an interesting one. And certainly, the idea that more physical activity, as measured by steps, is associated with better sleep quality and shorter sleep duration was actually really interesting. That was an unexpected finding to me. I think it reinforces what I see in my work, which is when people are getting better sleep quality, they don't need as much sleep. I often see people who come in, they think they're needing 8.5 hours of sleep. When they finish treatment, they're getting 7.5 and feeling great because they're getting much better quality sleep because they've made a lot of changes to improve their sleep. And that's certainly something that's actionable. We can tell, I can certainly tell my people that physical activity is a great way to improve your sleep quality. Something I tell them already, but that's something that applies in clinical and non-clinical populations, I would say.
Right.
Other questions? See anything in the chat? As always, I always have a lot of questions. So, if you were going to include other data, especially perhaps sociocultural data, what are some ideas you might have? I think you commented in the study on including light exposure or really light pollution, and you could argue both light pollution and noise pollution and even air pollution can adversely affect sleep, especially sleep quality. I imagine there are ways to measure that in different areas, but it would be really interesting, I think, to include that data in subsequent studies, these large-scale studies of sleep that cross national borders.
Right.
We actually tried including sunlight data, but I think it didn't work out well because I think people can like sit inside of the buildings and don't see light that often, and so it was really hard to control for individual light exposure. That was one thing. So maybe having light sensor on the wristband would be beneficial in the future. And another thing, as you mentioned, the exposure to the screen time will be another interesting thing to investigate, I think, especially during night times.
Right. So so we did collect the weather data together. So we collected all the weather data, connected to the exact region, such as like the average temperature or like sunlight timing or something like that. And we did all the regressions with those factors, but we didn't see any like interesting results. So maybe as Asim mentioned that it is like equally or evenly more important for people to do activity indoor, not outdoor. So maybe we can look at the indoor activity data together with coming with the weather data. So maybe that might be the future direction. And we can also think of the green space for each city. So how many greenery affects people with their sleep. So those are those kind of things I'm considering now. So this paper is kind of the first line of the like large scale data analysis. So as you Fiona mentioned that we can add up more like interesting data, we can have some more like intriguing results.
Yeah, I wish there were some way. I'm sure. I suspect in more rural areas, the use of wearables is less common. I wish there was some way of including that data because I do suspect people probably spend more time outdoors in more rural locations. And that may be a way, and probably less noise pollution, so less light pollution, less noise pollution. I could be wrong about that. You know, maybe people are spending all their time indoors on their devices, but my guess is there's going to be a bit of a difference. I just don't, I'm not sure how to do that. Because you were looking at all this wearable data and most of it clustered in cities, right?
Right. And you know, this data is coming from around like more than 5 or even more before. So maybe I think the current situation might be changing a bit because, you know, as time goes by, more and more people start wearing wearable devices. So I think it might be optimistic to see some patterns within the rural areas. And, you know, thanks to the, you know, all the geological image data, like GIS, from the satellites, we can, you know, analyze the how green spaces or how buildings are located in certain areas. So I can think I'm now thinking about connecting the wearable data and then all the geological image data together and see how it shows.
Oh, that would be fascinating. Yeah, that would be so interesting because I was really struck in the supplemental data with the consistency of how much sleep people were getting and the sleep efficiency so different from the populations I see. You know, generally it was 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep people were getting. Sleep efficiency was above 92%. That is, I very rarely see that. And for adults, good sleep efficiency is considered to be 85% or higher. So 92% is high. Plus the steps people were taking on average, generally pretty consistent once again. And so that makes me think urban environment. And again, I'd be really curious if you're able to get that data. I love what you're describing, Sean. I think that would be really interesting. But I would be very interested to see if there are differences between urban and rural environments, even within the same country. I'm guessing there would be, but I don't know. That's empirical.
Right. I think we can collaborate together about that direction. I'm really open to it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, Hassan.
Yeah, another thing that just came to my mind, I was thinking about it recently. I think in a lot of studies that I saw, they were mostly either Western or Eastern. But I think it will be also interesting to study Middle Eastern countries, Middle East, because of the different sleeping schedules they have. Maybe or compare sleeping patterns across religions as well, because they have different rituals that require disrupting sleep in different points of time.
Yeah,
and
that's a very
that
good
would
point.
be interesting. Yeah, to investigate in the future.
Yeah. Okay, I think, let me just make sure I've exhausted my questions.
Yeah, very interesting discussions.
Well, this study was just great. There was so much rich data here. It was a lot of fun to read it, a lot of fun to look at all the graphs and the tables and the figures. Really, really enjoyed it. So much more to be done. And just impressive, the data analytics with all this. I can't believe how much data you collected. I don't know how you navigated your way through all of it.
So we've lost a lot.
I mean, some very compelling and interesting findings from it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I've exhausted my questions. I don't see any others. So maybe we can put up that last slide. And while Catherine is doing that, let me just say thank you to both of you, Assam and Sean, for being here with us today. crossing time zones, joining us, and increasing the international reach of Society of Behavioral Sleep Medicine. It was such a pleasure, such a great study. Really, really nice to have you here to discuss it today. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all the great feedback, because actually this is kind of the first time to present our work, because we just published it in the journal, and then there was no like concrete feedback. So I was really happy that some of sleep researchers enjoyed our work. So it was really good for me and us as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
good. Win-win for both sides. All right. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We do have upcoming events for our webinars calendar. We have a clinical practice webinar on May 22nd, noon Eastern time, with Michelle Zhunis, who is an MD, and Leisha Kudahi is discussant. I'm going to talk about sleep effort, which for those who work with patients who have insomnia, sleep effort contraindicated, not a good idea. If you're trying to sleep, you're probably going to keep yourself awake longer. And another clinical practice webinar on July 10th. Again, discussants Michelle Zhunis, and this on Tibetan Buddhist mindfulness techniques. That's going to be so interesting. And finally, the final webinar, August 28th, personal branding with Joseph Jajewski, Denise Rodriguez. This will talk about how, from the perspective of people who've done it, how to create your own personal brand when you're wanting to get your name out there. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Great presentation, great discussion, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week.
I just read all the comments. That was lovely. Thank you very much, especially Dr. Julie Boyle. I really agree with that. We can have some implication about making green spaces based on the study. Thank you for all the comments.
All right, everyone, take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.